I'm Mark Fiera. Welcome to Vegas Legal Magazine Podcast. We're here with the publisher of Vegas Legal Magazine, Tyler Moore.
Hello, Mark.
And also joining us, Bureau Communications Vice President Jeff Haynes. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Jeff.
And David Nerdy Purdy on the board. Today we're going to take a look at a case that's one of the most troubling I've ever heard of in my entire career. On January 23rd, 2013, a Nevada Highway Patrol trooper pulled over Strawn Gorman, who was driving a motorhome on Interstate 80 near Wells, Nevada. Without going into great detail at this point, he was released without incident. But approximately 40 minutes later, he's pulled over again, this time near Elko, by an officer from the Elko County Sheriff's Office. And this time, authorities seized some $167,000 in cash. There were no drugs, no stolen guns, no evidence of a crime. But in a bizarre turn of events, authorities made moves and continue to make moves 4 years later to keep that money. Our guest today, Vincent Savarese III, known as Vinny in Las Vegas, partner at the firm Gentile, Cristalli, Miller, Armani. Savarese joins us to talk about this most interesting case. Thanks for joining us, Vinny.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here.
This is a really, really troubling dynamic, and it would be troubling if this was the only case, but this is happening all over the place.
Right.
Go, if you would. I just gave a thumbnail of what happened. Tell us what happened on that second stop.
Well, you really can't look at the stops independently of one another. The first stop by the Nevada Highway Patrol trooper was, as is typically the case, based upon an alleged traffic infraction. And
He was staying in the left-hand lane, driving too slowly.
slowly.
Now, under normal circumstances, I would say take his $167,000, keep it from being a moron that drives. But I digress.
So he stops him for that traffic violation, and then launches into a series of questions, all designed to see if he can determine what my client was doing, and that try to establish some foundation that he was up to no good generally. And on that particular corridor, of course, they're always looking to seize money that they think is being transported for drugs.
And in this case, you're talking about a motorhome,
Right.
a guy by himself.
Right.
So
High-profile vehicle,
Yeah.
capable of carrying
Yeah.
something, And of course, there was nothing suspicious about any of his answers. He kept them as long as he could. He tried to get a drug detection canine to be brought to the scene. Now, on these vehicle stops, you got to get that done within a reasonable period of time. You can't hold someone indefinitely waiting for a dog to arrive.
And this is not a small part of the case. This
This
is
is a major part of the case. So he held him for over half an hour with no justification. He didn't write him a ticket for the original traffic infraction alleged or anything like that. He's got to get this dog sniff done within the reasonable period of time that it would or should take a reasonably expeditious officer to write a ticket and let the motorist go on. But he didn't do that. He kept detaining him, calling every agency in the area, trying to get a dog there. I know this guy's got money. That might have been his instinct.
and he's got some traffic as
he's
well,
got-
right?
right.
To dispatch.
Right, to dispatch. And so he checked his records, and they're allowed to do that.
And no background.
No background. Then he went on to do what the courts call extraordinary records checks, not the driver's license, proof of insurance and registration, but calling up an organization called EPIC, which is the El Paso Information Center, which will tell them if you've ever been a suspect in a drug case or present at the time of an execution of a search warrant anywhere in the country, or anything like that, or if you have alleged associations. He's clean, So eventually he tries to get him to consent to a search of the vehicle. My client declined to consent, so he lets him go. He radios ahead, and he calls ahead to a specific, by cell phone, specific dog officer in Elko. He knows my client's heading to Sacramento. He knows he's got to drive through Elko, and says, I just let a guy go. I had to let him go. I held him as long as I could. I had no more reason to hold him. I can't get a dog here. Get out to the highway with your dog and intercept this guy. Find some reason to stop him.
This American who's never been subject to arrest, has probably never
No
been
criminal record
handcuffed.
whatsoever. And this other Elko County deputy sheriff was at their headquarters, was not out on patrol on the highway. Made a specific trip, grabbed his dog, got in his vehicle, headed out to I-80. Takes up a stationary position, waits for my client's rather unique vehicle, a high-profile white motorhome with Delaware plates, and waits for him to come along, gets in behind him, follows him, and then alleges that he touched the fog line. His tire touched the fog line, and alleges that his curtain was a little too far forward, blocking his view. So these, he alleges, are traffic infractions, and does another stop and holds him, questions him redundantly about the same thing, quite purposely, in order to see if he gives inconsistent answers, knowing that he had been stopped and questioned, and had discussed this with the first trooper in detail by cell phone. And my client gives the same consistent answers. He asks him now again for consent. He says, "No, I'm not consenting to a search of my vehicle. May I continue on with my trip? I just got stopped 40 minutes ago, and asked all this stuff." The second officer tells him, "Well, sir, we hear that all the time," and although he well knew that it was true, and denied, that had happened, or having knowledge rather that had happened. My client again did not consent, so he then very slowly, tells his partner, who a third officer appears and tells him, "Start a records check on this fella," which he had not done until then. He had spent a considerable period of time detaining him again, asking these other questions, and so they do a redundant records check, during which time he gets his dog out and runs it around the vehicle, and then alleges that the dog alerted to the vehicle. Conducts a search of the vehicle, warrantless search. Oh, well, actually, no, they got a telephonic warrant in this case. And he finds the money. And so those are essentially the facts of the case. And what it amounts to me, is a catch, release, recapture, leapfrog situation where you hold a guy and you essentially evade that time constraint on that first stop, that you have to get a dog there and have this done expeditiously. So the way around that, the end run, is to let him go,
Pick him up again.
but under controlled circumstances where you can grab him again. And there isn't any traffic violation in the book that a cop can't say he saw you do if he watches you long enough.
So
Elko has money sniffing dogs then.
They have money sniffing dogs. There are dogs for everything: cadavers, explosives,
Got a couple
drugs.
large bills in the trunk of it.
Yeah.
Going crazy.
There were no drugs in this car, but the dog apparently felt that there was, and that's what I call the tyranny of the dog.
Two of the reasons that are listed early on for why this takes, he can't give the address of the girlfriend's house that he's supposed to go to.
Off the top of his head.
If that's felony,
Yeah,
right down
right.
really deep. And the next is that he's got this 167,000, but it's wrapped and it's hidden away. It's hidden away from law enforcement. Think about this for a second. Everybody, folks at home, think about this. If you've got 167,000, knowing that banks get robbed for $2,500,
Right.
people going with guns,
Risk-
risk shooting the person or
Right.
getting killed for 25, and now you've got 167,000, not a life-changing amount of money, but maybe to some people a life-changing amount of money, and so. Is it hidden? Yeah, it's hidden. If I was put in a position where I had to move that kind of money, I would find a way to hide it. But that doesn't mean that you're hiding it from police. And that's part of the basis for what starts
Well,
this years and years.
Yeah, when you say hidden though, I'm not. There were no trap compartments or anything like aftermarket like installations. We're talking about this is a motorhome, so there are cabinets There's a little kitchen area. That's where the money was. And there's a little refrigerator. The money was in there too. It's not like they were hidden compartments.
But by the way, a real simple rule of thumb, if you remember the big Samsonite in plastic cases, $100 bills fill one of those Samsonite cases, works out to just about $1 million.
Is it?
Yeah, just about $1 million. Benny loaned the police
Yeah.
and I saw it.
I'm about $1 million shy of that.
So think about this for a second. This money doesn't, if it was, for a moment, think about this for a second, it's not spent to, we're gonna pull down taxpayers' expense in the state of Nevada, we're going to do this, this goes to the police department with a 20% rake by the feds.
That's
right?
correct. They get to keep the money. So the problem is, that's the essential problem. This is a perverse law enforcement motive. They have a financial interest in the outcome and in finding money in people's vehicles. So they are necessarily motivated to maximize the number of vehicles they stop, the number of people they detain, the number of vehicles they search. Because the more you stop, the more you search, the more you're gonna find. So there's less of an inclination to be mindful of constitutional limits on stops, searches, seizures, and detentions, and that's the problem.
In a perfect world, cops are neutral arbiters of whether or not you committed a crime. They just want to see if you did or didn't.
Well, they're looking at evidence, hopefully objectively.
And now you put them in a position, imagine this for a second. As a reporter, I worked around the intel cops, I worked around the dope cops, and the thing about those two groups is they're always around tremendous. If you're just a regular person, they're the possibility of somebody sticking an extra 10 grand, of walking away with this much money. And these cops go day in and day out, they go an entire career without ever taking a dime from one of these crime scenes that are pure as a driven snow and would never, ever, ever bend. But now you're talking about telling your boss that he's not gonna keep the $167,000, an entirely different situation. This is systematic. This is the system saying, are you going to have your department pick up the 167 minus the $33,000? Or are we gonna let things run the way the police do and keep this guy's money irrespective of the facts of the case?
Yeah.
It's just, it's a dirty
It lends itself
system.
to great abuse. And I'm not trying to suggest by any means that all police officers or hybrid patrol troopers are engaged in that kind of thing. I'm not. I'm simply saying that the way the laws are written at this time, it creates an incentive, a financial incentive for a police officer to violate the Fourth Amendment. I can't think of any other context at all. And I've been practicing criminal law for 38 years. I can't think of any other context in which there exists a financial incentive for a law enforcement officer to violate constitutional rights. I'm not saying that all the time constitutional rights end up getting violated. I am saying that there's a financial incentive to do so, and I am saying that it happens and happens frequently.
So how does a judge not find that there was no probable cause and then make this a fruit of the poisonous tree type thing?
Well, that's what our judge did in this particular case. Here we had the initial stop of the vehicle, which was an initial detention of my client, which was clearly excessive.
Yeah.
And therefore violated the Fourth Amendment. Then the second officer's follow-up surveillance of the vehicle, which was specifically procured by the first officer, it resulting in the alleged subsequent observation of another traffic infraction, another stop, another detention, and ultimately a search, is all fruit of the poisonous tree.
Correct.
It's all an exploitation, an investigative exploit, that's the test, an investigative exploitation of the initial predicate illegality. And that latter, can be very clearly traced in this case. Furthermore, our judge, federal judge in Reno, Judge Hicks, in a very courageous and a very progressive decision, which I, for one, happen to believe is consistent with the actual realities out there on the highways, also determined that both stops had to be analyzed as a singular Fourth Amendment episode, if you will, because found they were inextricably intertwined.
It is the tree.
And then measured the length of the duration of the detention of this citizen in a comprehensive, aggregate manner. And by that standard, it clearly exceeded all permissible bounds.
Yeah, in this case, law enforcement did a huge favor for your case when they accidentally left out that there had been an earlier stop. And, did we leave? The stapler didn't work that day.
Yeah.
They left out the original stop.
Now, if you read when I received the original police reports, they all begin with, on one fine sunny day, the second officer happened to be out on the highway.
Got lucky.
And along came this vehicle that touched the fog line and stopped him, and lo and behold, and then took his dog out, ran it, and that was that, and he alerted, and then we found this money. And made no reference whatsoever to the chain of events that led up to that. And the government's position throughout the litigation was that these two stops were completely independent. One had nothing to do with the other. The second officer is not obliged to disregard a traffic infraction that he sees under any circumstances. And in any event, these are two independent law enforcement actions, both independently permissible. But the federal court found otherwise. And they were, as I say, inextricably intertwined. It was a comprehensive, collusive, or let me just say, at least cooperative endeavor. When that happens, incidentally, on the other side of the coin, they call it the collective knowledge doctrine. If a police officer knows something and the second guy doesn't know, but is relying on the first police officer to make a stop of a vehicle, that's okay, because he can rely on the collective knowledge. But so in our case, of course, it's kind of a reverse collective knowledge. They did, know. One knew plenty, and the second guy tried to, disavow knowing what happened. But what we did was, we took civil discovery. It's a civil case, so we did interrogatories. You know what they are. Depositions. You know what they are. So we deposed these cops, and we subpoenaed the dispatch records from the Elko County headquarters, and found that he was specifically dispatched in response to the request of the first trooper. So the chain of events here was very clear, much to the chagrin of the government, because they did everything they could to obscure it and prevent us from finding this out.
How in the world did we get here? When did it become okay for police to take part in monies and cars and boats and everything else seized?
Well, there's nothing wrong with this notion in per se. I mean, police officers.
There isn't?
Well, not in stopping vehicles and on proper foundation.
I understand that.
And conducting searches on a proper foundation.
I understand that.
But there's nothing wrong with drug interdiction. There's nothing wrong with any of these legitimate law enforcement functions. What is not permissible in any criminal investigation is to violate the United States Constitution. These law enforcement investigations they just must not violate the constitutional constraints.
The question is, what was the genesis of this? When do I understand that seizures take place, but when do the police get to take over the value of those seizures? Was that?
That's federal statute.
Was that part of the move back in the 80s?
Yes.
With the flood of cocaine?
Right. That the civil forfeiture law started in the early 1980s.
Okay.
And it's based on a legal fiction. Civil asset forfeiture is based on a legal fiction that has been upheld as permissible, and that is that the property is the guilty party.
Bad money.
The thing is
Bad
guilty.
money.
The thing is guilty.
The car, the boat, the money.
The car, the boat, the cash, the Ferrari, whatever is the guilty thing. And so it title ownership of it switches to the government once it's used, derived, or acquired from illegal activity in law, in contemplation of law. It becomes the government's property. All it is a matter of proving that later. So it's considered to be the government's property way back to when it became forfeitable. It became forfeitable, for example, if cash was received in exchange for a sale of drugs. But the person who did that transaction, or no human being need be found guilty of any crime. As long as the thing is guilty, the thing belongs to the government.
So in here, the $167,000 is considered guilty.
That's correct. The title of the case is United States of America versus $167,070.
You gotta be kidding me.
That's the title of the case. That's the title of all forfeiture cases. You'll see that,
So who signs the retainer fee to represent the $167,000?
the claimant, or so-called real party in interest. But the defendant is the asset. The Strong Gorman is not the defendant in this case. He's the party claiming ownership, but it's the property that's the defendant.
So on this money, he couldn't pull out enough bank records or anything to show money.
Wouldn't make any
drawn?
difference,
I mean,
would it?
Well, it makes a difference.
because they pull out cash.
Well, we
and
never got
deposit
to-
cash all
Yeah,
the time at different amounts. So, I'll pull it out just so I have it, and then when I realize that I'm in a habit where I'll pull out so much a week, so I always know that I have cash, but then I'll realize, I've got 20, and then I deposit it back.
In this case, we never got to those issues. We never got to the point where we were actually litigating whether the money was forfeitable.
You got cut way out real early
Yeah.
on the search
Right,
itself, right?
My attack was in the bud, at the search and seizure point of the game. And in many of these cases, you better win. If you don't win at that stage, you may very well not win. So the court suppressed the money as evidence, prevented it from being brought before the court, and because it was illegally obtained. So that was the end of the inquiry. Had that not been the case, then we would have gotten involved in the litigation of whether this money is in fact drug money or whatever the allegation may be. We never got there here. And when you do, however, to answer your question, the government can demand in interrogatories, which are legal questions you're required to answer, where did you get the money? Where did you acquire this money? Now you can, as in any case, civil or criminal, if that question is problematic, then one can take the Fifth Amendment.
Oops, there goes your money.
Okay, but when you do that, you will lose the case, because the court may draw an adverse inference from your invocation of the Fifth Amendment. Why? Because again, this is a civil case. That couldn't be done in a criminal case. But this is not a criminal case, even though all the allegations and all the thing is all about criminal activity, allegedly. You can't take the Fifth without suffering that adverse inference, and the court can infer then that it was
So in other instances, a criminal can get illegally stopped, and they can do an illegal stop, search, seizure. But then because of the fruit of the poisonous tree, he could get off at the time. Somebody could have drugs on him, but they can get off if the police screw up in the process of search and seizure.
Right.
However, even if the police officers screw up on that, they can impound his Ferrari if they determine that that was purchased with illegal funds also?
Well, no, nothing can be obtained from an illegal search or seizure.
Well,
That's
that-
why
that's
this
why
money,
you're doing this, yeah.
You know, that's why this money was ordered to be returned.
Okay.
And then,
And then the government appealed.
so the bad money has to stay in money jail, and you can't bail it out unless you got another $167,000.
Right.
You can't bail the money out. So the bad money stays in jail, clock's ticking. How much time, you know, in the movies, this works pretty clean, you get it done in about 20 minutes. How much time?
They were
goes-
ordered to return this money, plus reimburse my client for all of my attorney's fees.
And when was that?
And that was, oh my gosh, about a year and a half ago.
Now, this started in
Yeah.
13?
Yeah, 13, yeah.
Yeah. So January of 2013.
We're 4 years in.
This poor money has been in jail without visitors this whole time.
Yeah.
And so now they appeal.
Yeah, I just came back.
And now
Yeah.
just came back from arguing
I
that.
just argued the case in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco in defense of the order in our favor, which the government went to the Ninth Circuit to try to overturn.
When do you expect to have a ruling on the appeal?
Yeah, you know, there's no telling. There's
Yeah.
no telling. It involves, some complex Fourth Amendment questions and in one sense, a very novel argument that Judge Hicks found valid and ruled in favor of, which is this idea of this cooperative, this successive vehicle stop concept to avoid the parameters of a single stop. There's no probable cause to search because there's no dog sniff test. And I could talk about that too if you want, because I've got a lot of opinions about that. But not having that, and they've got a reasonable period of time to achieve that, but no longer than it would ordinarily take to investigate and issue a citation or take other action based upon the alleged traffic infraction for which you were stopped. Now, if you were stopped for some other reason, such as a pre-existing investigation of you, and they had independent probable cause of drug activity, that's a different matter. Then they can hold them, that's a different matter. Then they don't have to proceed as expeditiously as they are required to do when they're claiming no more than a traffic infraction as the basis for which they're holding you. If they had a prior investigation with surveillance, maybe informants, wiretaps, other sources of evidence indicating probable cause that that you're making a trip with drugs right now, and that vehicle you're in is containing the drugs, why then that's probable cause to search the vehicle without the pretense of holding a guy on a traffic infraction ad infinitum, or let him go, stop him again, hold him again, as was done in this case. This becomes abusive, it's unjustifiable, it doesn't have the underpinnings to sustain it.
How close are we to cash being illegal? Sizable
Oh my
amounts of
gosh.
cash of being illegal?
Well, that's a good question. I've often thought that all of this may someday lead to the abolition of cash, and that people would have a universal card or something that they would have to use for every purchase they did, so that the government can monitor all we do in terms of commercial and other transactions, and therefore, which would prevent private transactions pretty much effectively in their entirety. I mean, no one would be able to, unless we all had to have a little swiper on our phone or something, so that every transaction, if I wanted to buy, a painting from you,
Yeah.
I'd have to, do the transaction with my universal government card and swipe it and make sure that there's a record. We're getting there. for quite some time, and also dating back to the same era in the 1980s, there became the requirement of the cash transaction reporting requirement, for example, where transactions in currency over $10,000 must be reported to the government. And that $10,000 means as long as that $10,000 is collected within a year, so that if I buy something from you, or someone retains my services, for example, and their fee is, for my representation, exceeds $10,000, which is common,
Yeah.
and he pays me in cash, I am required to report that payment to me, to the government, if it's over 10,000. And if I receive the last dollar within a year from now, it has to be reported as a singular $10,000 transaction that taxable year. And of course, that gets compared to his returns and so forth. And it's also, they have corresponding laws, statutes now for what they call structuring. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but so to avoid that, people sometimes will go and they'll make 3 deposits in a bank in one day for $3,000 apiece, and instead of making maybe make 333.
No red lights there.
No. And that's a crime. Now that is a crime to do that, and it's called structuring. And so there's a lot of monitoring of anything involving cash, and it all derives from excuse me, the era of I suppose one might say the drug trafficking era that began like in the 80s. Yeah.
So knowing what we know, knowing that it's coming up on 40 years of the golden days of drug traffickers, and that most working cops can't remember when there wasn't a revenue stream from these type of seizures, now that they're 40 or 2 generations into this, is there any way that this ever turns around? Is there any time that police somehow go back to being neutral arbiters and not profiting from cash and property seizures?
Well, there's only one effective. There are 2 deterrents in my mind. One is the preservation of the Fourth Amendment exclusionary rule, where the courts turn their back on evidence illegally seized in this fashion, which is what happened, fortunately for me, in this case. I've handled a great many cases over the years of this nature, as you know, and not just in forfeiture cases, but in controlled substance cases. And I do a lot of search and seizure work. And so I'm an advocate, have been all my legal life, for the strict application of the so-called exclusionary rule, which has taken a beating in the Supreme Court over the years, with during the era of an increasingly conservative Supreme Court, where many exception after exception after exception to the exclusionary rule has been crafted in order to allow illegally obtained evidence to find its way into court. And the only other deterrent are civil rights lawsuits, which fortunately still remain, as does the Fourth Amendment, although many people consider it the incredible shrinking Fourth Amendment. It's been my life's work to champion the Fourth Amendment.
I've always, in my offices, I've always had a grandfather's clock, because it always reminds me that irrespective of where we are, that things can turn around. And I really do think in some ways, it was the Warren Court that put the backbone into this.
It was the Warren Court
and said the most dangerous thing that we have is not criminals going around doing this. The most dangerous thing that we have is that we take a professional police department across the country, and that we can show them that there's an upside to bending or breaking the rules. And the Warren Court just tossed them out left and right.
Right.
If that's how you're grabbing these people,
Right.
you won't get a successful prosecution.
Most of the landmark Supreme Court precedents that stand for the various propositions that I work with involving illegal searches and seizures and the exclusion of the evidence and are all derived from the Warren era, more or less. But don't be surprised, because I'll tell you this. As it turns out, a great champion of the Fourth Amendment turned out to be Justice Scalia, the late Justice Scalia, who we just lost last year. He wrote several very important Fourth Amendment decisions that preserved and strengthened the protection of citizens from law enforcement techniques in violation of the Fourth Amendment, finding Fourth Amendment violations that are applicable to our modern technological society that the founding fathers would never even have conceived of, such as placing a GPS device under a suspect's motor vehicle to follow him everywhere he goes, such as placing going above a residence with a heat sensing device, to determine whether or not there's a grow house is happening, and requiring that a warrant be obtained from a neutral magistrate before a police officer acting
I remember
alone.
that case from law school, actually. Yeah.
Are you a lawyer?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't
Yeah.
know that. So that's the Kylo case, and then the Jones case with the GPS device was a very, very
Yeah, because it was the drone, and then the other one was the police officer. I think that wanted to look over the fence and into the window and stuff, and there was sort of like he got onto something.
he got onto
and
the
everything.
curtilage of the property.
And there was that whole debate on
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And also, Justice Scalia authored the decision that said, while you may run a dog around someone's vehicle in a public place, such as on the side of the roadway, it's not a search. It doesn't require a warrant. The dog is simply sniffing the free air around the vehicle. There's no intrusion. Going inside the vehicle then is an intrusion, but the dog's alert gives you that probable cause to do so. But in and of itself, the dog sniff doesn't implicate the Fourth Amendment. However, it was Justice Scalia who said that to take that dog onto private property and go around the perimeter of a home did require a warrant, because there's a trespassery act occurring.
Expectation of privacy.
You're entering a private enclave in order to deploy the dog. And that to some people might seem to be, that's actually a very, very honest and a very faithful adherence to the Fourth Amendment. And a lot of people wouldn't think that as conservative or a strict construction justice like Justice Scalia would be the guy who wrote all these.
That is totally of surprise. I would imagine one of the first remedies to ratchet this down is to instead of earmarking these funds for the police department, the first step would be that they would go into a general fund.
Good point. Because I personally do not see, I think, and this is just personal opinion, I mean, I'm not a member of Congress, but were I a member of Congress, I certainly wouldn't vote in favor of legislation that allows investigating agencies charged with observing the Constitution in their duties to acquire a financial motive to violate those constraints. And that's what this is. After all, it stands to reason. I mean, if there's money in it, I might be more, as a police officer, more inclined to take a chance on conducting a search that I otherwise might myself believe to be over the line. Even this police officer in this case, I had to let this guy go. He goes, "You gotta get out there with your dog. I had to let him go. He knew he'd gone over the line and waited and detained him without justification. More than, oh my gosh, I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Tasers on
I didn't
stun.
think about that.
And there wasn't really like 200,000 in a vehicle, and you know, cop just sort of pocketed the 30.
I mean, where do they get, why should they
They
get
just
the money?
declared that there was
You know,
160,000.
it ought to go into the general fund.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that eliminates at least the immediacy of the temptation to say, wow, what the heck, or to act on hunch rather than probable cause is something that a police officer in the field has to be mindful of every day. That it's not his personal hunches, and you know, it's not that the Constitution doesn't say that police officers cannot act on suspicion, but it says that, what it says is that they have to submit those suspicions to a neutral magistrate and obtain that approval, except under extraordinary or exceptional circumstances. And as I say, there are many exceptions, but that's the general rule. And in fact, the case that says that says because, and this is the language, this is the exact language, because of the often competitive enterprise of ferreting out crime. It is an often competitive enterprise, but in this instance, it's a financially rewarding one as well.
You know, it seems to me that if there's a city in the United States that has a dog in that fight, it's Las Vegas.
Oh, yeah, oh, the whole state of Nevada.
Carrying cash.
Yeah.
Carrying, you know, think of a high roller, how many guys that insist on turning everything into cash the second they walk out of the casino.
Right.
If they're driving a Ferrari on one of these back roads and they're walking around with $250,000, which people do because they feel good about having that money, they feel they've accomplished something.
Yeah.
And they need to know.
Yeah.
They have a big target on their backs when it
Yeah.
comes to the United States. There may be any other place in the world that you get away with. You know, it's the one thing that we all talk about. We're driving out in the country. You come to a small town and you say, "Watch the speed limit." That's all these guys have to live off of is traffic tickets. You know they're going to figure out a way to jump the speed limit down to nothing on a turn when you can't see it, and they've got you.
Yeah.
Well, that is that sleight of hand that, you know, necessitated by just the way things are. But this is something
By the
so
way,
far
Mark,
beyond.
I don't wanna create the impression. I'm not an anarchist. I'm a lawyer. I don't believe we should live in a lawless society. All I'm saying is I don't have a problem with speed limits. I have a problem with police officers who claim there was a speed limit violation when there was not, or who claim that there's some sort of other type of traffic infraction when there is not. I mean, you know, the Ninth Circuit has specifically held that crossing the fog line momentarily is not a traffic offense justifying a vehicle stop. And yet, even though that's a decision on the books, vehicles are stopped. I hear this all the time on this basis. And if you're not familiar with that particular case, or your lawyer isn't, maybe, you know, you won't effectively challenge that. Yeah, but it's like in anything else. I mean, and it's hard for people to find good lawyers in these cases because oftentimes, you know, they're unable to pay a lawyer's a fee to go, or what's that expression? Throw good money after bad, but would have to find a lawyer willing to take a case on a contingency fee basis and a percentage of what he can get back. But it's so hard to win these.
And protracted.
And a lot of lawyers will not accept employment in the matter because you really have to be really familiar with all the tricks to have any kind of a chance, you know, because you got so much stacked against you.
Yeah, we've heard of a couple of cases, pursuant to Mark's point, where maybe some high stakes gamblers, some professional card players of some sort, maybe coming to or from a large poker tournament or a juicy blackjack game they wanted to go to. And whether it's one guy traveling alone or a small group of 2 or 3, they could easily have, $40, $50, $100,000 cash in the car.
Mhm.
And we've seen a couple of examples where that cash has been seized on the highway. And I've also heard a couple of those guys kind of throw up their hands and say, well, they're afraid it'll cost them that much just to get the money back. So they
Right.
really feel like they're in a
Right,
bad
exactly. So, and as Mark said, Nevada is certainly the state in the union that is unique in this scenario because of the gambling thing, and the cash gambler phenomenon is part of the Las Vegas tradition.
It's like you've got pro baseball, and the only change in the rule is the umpire makes 50 grand if the home team wins. Everything else is on the square. You just change that one rule. He's no longer a completely separate arbiter of fact. He's just isn't. He simply isn't.
Well, the case still has to go to court. He still has to get the prosecutor to file the case. But there's no reluctance there.
I mean, what's the deterrence? For
There is none.
Sheriff, should I file on this?
So they lose the case. Sheriff's back at it and he tries it again on somebody.
Right, even this case, although this was a major loss to them, this particular case, I don't have any illusions that this is going to necessarily deter other officers from taking shots with searches when they ought not to be.
Yeah, it's not even gonna have any detriment to the officers in the case.
Except if they were to be sued for violation of civil rights, and that's a possible deterrent. As far as my case is concerned, it's not over yet actually, because they've taken their appeal, and I'm hoping upon hope that the Ninth Circuit panel that I argued the case before is going to see fit to uphold this decision. But
How did that go? Were the points raised by the government?
the government's points were that the two stops were entirely unrelated and separate events. The justices laughed when they said that.
That's a pretty strange place to go when there's documentation,
Yeah.
when there's tapes,
Well,
dispatch.
I get that. I don't understand why the government pursued the appeal here. I honestly think that this would have been a good case for the government to just fold their tent and go home. But they didn't. And who knows what will happen. I mean, I'm never surprised. I'm usually the guy that's doing the appealing, put it that way. And in this case, I wasn't.
I hear you.
Yeah.
So what's the best possible outcome for your client?
An affirmance of Judge Hicks's decision, in order to return the money, to pay him, reimburse his legal fees in the district court, and to reimburse his legal fees in the Ninth Circuit too. And maybe, if the government then files a petition for certiorari in the Supreme Court of the United States, by the time they're done, maybe they'll owe my guy $1 million. I don't know.
Does he get like a federally imposed interest rate of like
It does.
one
Judgment rate.
tenth of a percent?
Yeah, it's gonna
compounded
be the
annually?
judgment rate, which is pretty low. But who knows? No telling. I'll tell you this. It all depends on how the court, if the court affirms the decision, and I certainly hope they do, they could affirm it on narrower basis than Judge Hicks granted it. There is room for them to be, and some of their questioning, you know how the appeals courts work. It's all question and answer with the lawyers.
Tea leaves.
What did he
ask?
And the questions they were asking tend to make me think they were seeking narrower ground because don't forget, he found that the two independent events were a singular episode. There are not many cases out there. There are maybe 3 or 4 courts that have ever said that I'm aware of. And I researched this thing pretty thoroughly, as you can imagine. And the Supreme Court has never said that that's the law. So
It's a half hour, that's the threshold for just.
Well, yeah, I've never, the Supreme Court of the United States has never held that 2 independent stops and detentions may be analyzed as one and apply the time limit to them in a comprehensive sense, and apply all the limits to them comprehensively, as if it was one stop. That's what Judge Hicks did here, and I think he was quite right to do so, because the reality is, these were inextricably intertwined, there's no doubt about it.
They were bound.
They
The
were-
second does not happen.
Yeah, I mean, these 2 events are Siamese twins in law, as far as I'm concerned. And that's, however, a rather a radical proposition. But this case, what makes this case so important is it had the facts to justify it. We had the facts. No thanks to the government's candor, but because we scraped and dug till we found them. And they did all they could to stop us, and Judge Hicks called them out on it too, in his decision specifically.
You know, when you read this, one of the things that's so striking in this, they're so frustrated by the first stop, and obviously more so frustrated in the second. They hit their 167,000. They're gonna leave him on the side of the road
Yeah.
in northern Nevada in January. What if he'd just died?
They took his motorhome too, although they ended up giving that back. But they did tell him, and by the way, all of this is on videotape. It's all on body cam. And which is why I tell you here today, I'm a big supporter of body cams being mandatory.
It's changed the world.
Okay, it'll help cops defeat false claims against them,
All the time.
but it will also vindicate citizens in the ever-present credibility battle between them and police officers.
You know what I see, to take that up for a moment, you see, in writing, it's the police officer scuffled with the suspect. When you see it, it's the cop who's wearing a gun that could get that gun pulled out, and the cop could get shot in the head at any second. And I think the body cams have done a remarkable service for police officers who all they want to do is do their job and go home and be able to look their wife in the eye or husband in the eye and say, see, I didn't take the wrong job and get myself blown away so you never see me again. Honest cops come out pretty good on these body cams. You see what they.
Body cams are great for honest cops.
Yeah,
Okay.
there is no scuffle.
And the majority
There
of cops
is-
are honest cops.
Yeah, the vast majority.
Okay.
And when you look at, we look at these individual incidents and we remember that police on the street may go through this 4 and 5 times a year. Any one of these fights could end their career. Any one of these fights could change their lives. Any one of these fights could get them killed. But until now, all we heard is a scuffle. Well, that ain't no scuffle. I've seen them over and over again.
And the presence, the ever-present citizen with his phone cam.
Oh, we just saw
It has changed the world, right? I mean, in this country anyway. I mean, look, I'm a big fan and supporter of honest and brave and law enforcement officers that protect us. Thank God for them. On the other hand, I'm charged in my job with being one of those people who has to be mindful of vindicating situations where it's not on the up and up. And when I think about cases where where, for example, that fellow was admittedly ran from a traffic stop, and the cop shot him in the back as he ran,
And dropped the
and then went
taser
over
at
and
him.
dropped a taser next to him.
Just to make it all good.
Okay, and little did he know, some citizen was taking it all in with that
That poor barber,
Phone.
I gotta tell you that, I saw that video and I thought, that barber does not understand, when you got a cop that just went that crazy, how thin the ice that
Oh my
he's standing
God.
on.
Oh
But for
my
his
God.
video, no, all this goes away and it's just fine.
Right, so maybe, he has to think about whether it's, in the cop's best interest that he go away.
Yeah, exactly. Barber? I didn't see Barber.
Are we using a lot of body cams in Nevada?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not a mandatory thing, it's sort
I
of.
think it's a bill to make it mandatory, it's in the legislature now, I
From
think.
across the country, they're kind of backfilling these right now. You
Yeah.
know, where originally they'd have such a percent, and as time goes on, I think they're in the position of kind of backfilling so that every officer has them. But for honest cops, it's a godsend.
Yeah.
And you know what? You do give the cop the benefit of the doubt. I hate to put it this way, but tie goes to the runner. But in those cases where there've just been some egregious shootings, the one thing that you saw again today is the police department, after viewing the tape, fires the bad cop. It never happened before, and it's starting to happen now. They cut them loose as soon as they see that. When they saw that car pulling away, they fired that, and he shot a rifle into the car and killed a 17-year-old kid. The kid looked about as innocent and, just a really great kid. 3.5 average. So the coach said one thing: he never missed a day in class, and he's dead now. And they said that he was in the car, and the car was backing up, and nothing could be further from the truth. The car backed up for a moment and then pulled forward to move away from the cop. Cop pulled the rifle and shot the kid in the head and killed him.
And another area where it's important, I think, is in, a lot of the more controversial cases, and a lot of the litigation, criminal and civil, are involving instances in where there is racial profiling, and tend to be, that issue is ever present in many of these situations, and oftentimes the minority citizen historically has not been believed when making claims about certain conduct with which he has been confronted.
Didn't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
And even the most minor violations of the past, in this case, the reason that they said that he ran, going back to the drop taser cases, because he was late on child support. He didn't want to go to Milwaukee for the weekend.
Right.
And
that doesn't justify him running.
But
He can't run from a police officer from a lawful stop.
absolutely.
But you can't kill him for it.
Look, they got the car, they got his license, they're gonna
Yeah.
arrest him. They're gonna arrest him in 24 hours.
Yeah, but he
Arrest him in
was,
72
he
hours.
didn't look like, he didn't exactly look like Jesse Owens either.
No.
And I think he could have been caught
Yeah.
in a traditional fashion.
It was a very, very, very sad case, and I do think that these cases are going to change the way. I never saw a single case at when we had the coroner's inquests where they did anything but to support the cop.
Well,
We weren't there.
it's a hard thing to overcome, the natural inclination of fact finders to believe that a police officer will necessarily and always tell the truth about a matter in dispute. I'm not suggesting that that's not often, if not the majority of the time, that's not in fact true. But it takes a great deal to it's difficult to prove it when it's not, and the body cam helps to do justice both ways. That's why I like it.
And with that, we will call it a day. I hope we're gonna have you back on again. I wanna hear about the
Anytime.
rest of this case.
Anytime.
And he always has the most interesting cases, by the way. So the Vegas Legal Podcast, thanks to Vinny Savarese, partner at the firm Gentile Cristalli, Miller, Armani, Savarese, a really, really good crew down there. Tyler Morgan, publisher of Vegas Legal Magazine, thanks for doing the good work bringing new life to the legal community in Southern Nevada. Jeff Haney, Vice President of Fiero Communications, the friendliest marketing firm in Las Vegas. David Nerdy Purdy on the board, and for all of you out there with Story ID and Axe to Grind, get a hold of Vegas Legal Leading Magazine in Southern Nevada Legal Marketing. Call Tyler at
222-3476.
Reach out, tell your friends. Have a good one. We are out of here.
That was fun.